Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her friends in high school were worried about prom dates and college applications, she was reading military history books and dreaming of serving her country. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she watched the military helicopters fly overhead during training exercises and knew she wanted to be part of something bigger than herself. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had mixed feelings about her military aspirations. He understood the call to serve, but he also knew the dangers that came with it. Her mother worried constantly, but Sarah's determination was unwavering. She enlisted in the Army right after graduating high school, much to her parents' concern and pride. The training was harder than anything Sarah had ever experienced. Basic training pushed her to her physical and mental limits, but she thrived under pressure. She discovered she had a natural aptitude for mechanics and aviation maintenance. Her instructors noticed her attention to detail and her ability to work under stress. When it came time to choose her specialty, Sarah knew exactly what she wanted to do. She applied for aviation maintenance training, specifically for the AH-64 Apache attack helicopter. The Apache was one of the most sophisticated and deadly machines in the military arsenal, and Sarah was fascinated by its complexity. The training was intense and highly technical. She spent months learning every bolt, wire, and system in the aircraft. She studied the twin engines, the advanced targeting systems, the 30mm chain gun, and the missile systems that made the Apache such a formidable weapon. After completing her training with honors, Sarah was assigned to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division. This was where she would put her training to the test, maintaining the aircraft that would carry soldiers into combat zones around the world. The base was massive, with helicopters constantly taking off and landing for training missions and deployments. Sarah quickly established herself as one of the most reliable mechanics in her unit. She worked long hours, often starting before dawn and finishing well after sunset. Her supervisors appreciated her work ethic and attention to detail. She never cut corners and always double-checked her work. In the world of aviation maintenance, a small mistake could cost lives, and Sarah took that responsibility seriously. The other mechanics in her unit initially tested her, as they did with all newcomers. Being a young woman in a male-dominated field brought additional challenges, but Sarah proved herself through her skill and dedication. She could diagnose problems quickly, work efficiently under pressure, and never complained about the difficult conditions or long hours. One particular Apache helicopter became Sarah's specialty. It was an older aircraft that had seen multiple deployments and required more maintenance than the newer models. The crew chief had nicknamed it Old Reliable, because despite its age and the constant repairs it needed, it always performed when called upon. Sarah developed an intimate knowledge of every system on this particular aircraft. The helicopter's pilot was Captain James Morrison, a seasoned aviator with multiple combat tours under his belt. He was known for being extremely particular about his aircraft and had high standards for the maintenance crews. Many mechanics found him intimidating, but Sarah appreciated his attention to detail. She knew that his high standards came from years of depending on his aircraft in life-threatening situations. Captain Morrison had been flying helicopters for over 15 years. He had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, flying dangerous missions in hostile territory. His experience had taught him that the difference between life and death often came down to the reliability of his equipment and the skill of the people who maintained it. He had developed strong relationships with maintenance crews throughout his career and had learned to quickly identify which mechanics he could trust completely. Sarah's reputation for thorough work had reached Captain Morrison's ears even before they worked together. Other pilots had mentioned the young mechanic who never missed a detail and always went above and beyond what was required. When he was assigned to the aircraft that Sarah maintained, he was curious to see if the reputation was deserved. Their first interaction was brief but telling. Captain Morrison performed his pre-flight inspection with Sarah accompanying him, explaining the maintenance that had been performed. He asked technical questions that would have stumped many experienced mechanics, but Sarah answered each one confidently and accurately. She showed him the work she had done and explained her reasoning for certain decisions. Captain Morrison was impressed by her knowledge and professionalism. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Captain Morrison developed a working relationship built on mutual respect. He appreciated her thoroughness and technical expertise, while she valued his experience and understanding of how the aircraft performed in real-world conditions. Their conversations often extended beyond the immediate maintenance issues to discuss improvements and modifications that could enhance the helicopter's performance. Sarah took pride in maintaining Captain Morrison's aircraft to the highest possible standards. She knew that her work directly affected his safety and the success of his missions. Every inspection she performed was thorough. Every repair was done to perfection, and every system was tested multiple times before she signed off on the work. The maintenance hangar where Sarah worked was a busy place, with multiple aircraft in various stages of maintenance and repair. The sound of tools, engines, and conversation created a constant background noise. Sarah had learned to focus completely on her work, despite the distractions around her. She could diagnose problems by listening to subtle changes in engine sounds or feeling slight vibrations that others might miss. One particular maintenance task that Sarah performed regularly was cleaning and inspecting the Apache's 30mm chain gun. This weapon system was mounted under the aircraft's nose and was capable of devastating firepower. The gun required regular cleaning and maintenance to ensure it functioned properly when needed. Sarah had performed this task hundreds of times and had developed her own systematic approach to ensure nothing was overlooked. The gun cleaning process was meticulous and time-consuming. Sarah would carefully remove panels to access the internal mechanisms, clean each component thoroughly, inspect for wear or damage, and then reassemble everything according to strict specifications. She paid particular attention to the ammunition feed system, the firing mechanism, and the targeting interface. Every component had to be perfect because a malfunction in combat could be fatal. During these maintenance sessions, Sarah often worked alone, focusing intensely on the task at hand. She found the detailed work satisfying and took pride in keeping the weapon system in perfect condition. Her thoroughness had prevented several potential malfunctions that could have caused serious problems during missions. The hangar was especially busy on this particular morning. Several aircraft were scheduled for major maintenance, and the normal routine was disrupted by the increased activity. Sarah arrived early to get a head start on her work, knowing that the day would be hectic. She began her usual routine with Captain Morrison's Apache, starting with a general inspection before moving on to the specific maintenance tasks scheduled for that day. As Sarah worked on cleaning the chain gun, she was completely focused on the task. She had removed her uniform jacket due to the warm temperature in the hangar and was wearing a green military t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and she wore safety glasses to protect her eyes from cleaning solvents and debris. The cleaning process required her to reach into tight spaces and work at awkward angles. Sarah was methodical in her approach, cleaning each component thoroughly before moving on to the next. She used specialized tools and cleaning solutions designed specifically for this weapon system. The work was physically demanding, requiring her to stretch and contort her body to reach all the necessary areas. As she worked, Sarah was unaware that Captain Morrison had entered the hangar and was conducting his own pre-flight inspection of another aircraft nearby. He moved through his checklist systematically, examining various components and systems. His inspection routine was as thorough as Sarah's maintenance procedures, and he took his time to ensure everything met his standards. The hangar's busy atmosphere meant that neither Sarah nor Captain Morrison was immediately aware of the other's presence. Sarah continued her detailed cleaning of the gun system, while Captain Morrison worked his way around his aircraft, checking fuel lines, inspecting rotor blades, and examining engine components. It wasn't until Captain Morrison moved to inspect the weapon systems on his aircraft that their paths began to converge. As he approached the area where Sarah was working, he could see her dedication to the task at hand. Her careful, methodical approach impressed him, as it always did. He had worked with many maintenance personnel over the years, but few showed the level of commitment and attention to detail that Sarah consistently demonstrated. Captain Morrison paused his own inspection to watch Sarah work. He appreciated seeing maintenance performed at such a high level, and often learned from observing skilled mechanics at work. Sarah's technique was flawless, and her understanding of the weapon system was evident in how efficiently she worked. As Sarah continued her work, she reached up to clean a particularly difficult area of the gun mechanism. The movement caused her t-shirt to shift slightly, and for the first time, a small patch on her left shoulder became visible. It was a patch she always wore under her uniform, something personal that she kept hidden from casual view. The moment Captain Morrison's eyes focused on that patch, his entire demeanor changed. His face went pale, and his body became rigid with shock. The clipboard in his hand began to shake slightly as the full impact of what he was seeing registered in his mind. The patch bore a symbol and unit designation that he recognized immediately, and its presence on Sarah's shoulder raised questions that he had never thought to ask. Captain Morrison's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. The patch represented something from his past that he had never spoken about, a mission that remained classified, and people who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Seeing it here, in this place, on this young mechanic who had been maintaining his aircraft for months, seemed impossible. His shock was so complete that he couldn't move or speak. He stood frozen, staring at the patch while memories flooded back. The implications of its presence here were staggering, and he needed to understand how and why Sarah was wearing something that connected her to one of the most significant and tragic events of his military career. Sarah, still focused on her work, remained unaware of Captain Morrison's presence or his reaction to seeing her patch. She continued cleaning the gun mechanism with the same careful attention to detail that had earned his respect. But everything was about to change. The discovery of that hidden patch was about to transform their professional relationship into something far more profound and complicated. The moment hung in the air like a suspended breath, pregnant with questions and implications that neither of them could have anticipated. Captain Morrison's rigid stance and pale complexion betrayed the emotional storm brewing inside him as he struggled to understand how this young woman had come to possess something that connected her to his most painful memories. In that instant, the busy hangar around them faded into background noise. The routine maintenance task that Sarah was performing suddenly became secondary to the mystery that patch represented. Captain Morrison knew he had to speak with her, but finding the right words for a conversation he had never expected to have would prove to be one of the most challenging moments of his military career. Captain Morrison stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the patch on Sarah's shoulder. The familiar Eagle and Lightning Bolt design with the unit number 217 Cav brought back memories he had tried to bury for years. His throat felt dry, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The patch belonged to the 2nd Squadron, 17th Cavalry Regiment, a unit that held special significance in Captain Morrison's military career. It wasn't just any unit patch. It represented a group of soldiers he had served with during one of his most dangerous deployments in Afghanistan. More importantly, it connected Sarah to people who had meant everything to him, people who hadn't made it home. Unable to contain his shock any longer, Captain Morrison cleared his throat. "Excuse me, Sergeant Martinez," he called out, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. Sarah looked up from her work, surprised to see the pilot standing nearby. She had been so focused on cleaning the gun mechanism that she hadn't heard him approach. "Yes, sir?" Sarah replied, setting down her cleaning cloth and standing at attention. She noticed immediately that something was wrong. Captain Morrison's usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by an expression of confusion and what looked like barely controlled emotion. His face was pale, and she could see tension in his posture that she had never observed before. Captain Morrison struggled to find the right words. How do you ask someone about something that might be deeply personal? How do you inquire about a connection that might not even exist? He took a deep breath and decided on a direct approach. "That patch on your shoulder," he said slowly, pointing to the barely visible emblem under her t-shirt. "The 217 calf patch. Where did you get it?" Sarah's hand instinctively moved to cover the patch, her expression becoming guarded. She had always been careful to keep it hidden under her uniform, wearing it close to her heart where others couldn't see it. The patch was deeply personal to her, connected to memories that were both precious and painful. She hadn't expected anyone to notice it, and she certainly hadn't expected to be questioned about it. "It was my brother's, sir," Sarah replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez. He served with the 2-17 Cav in Afghanistan." The words hit Captain Morrison like a physical blow. Miguel Martinez. The name brought back a flood of memories that he had been trying to process for years. He remembered Miguel well, a young cavalry scout who had been part of his unit during a particularly dangerous deployment. Miguel had been brave, dedicated, and well-respected by everyone who served with him. "Miguel Martinez," Captain Morrison repeated, his voice filled with recognition and pain. "I knew your brother, Sarah. I served with him." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. In all the months she had been maintaining Captain Morrison's aircraft, he had never mentioned knowing her brother. She had never told anyone on the base about Miguel, keeping his memory private and personal. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet the recognition in Captain Morrison's eyes told her it was true. "You knew Miguel?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "You were there with him?" Captain Morrison nodded slowly, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I was his pilot on several missions. Miguel was a good soldier, Sarah. One of the best I ever worked with." The conversation that followed was unlike any they had ever had. Captain Morrison told Sarah stories about her brother that she had never heard. He described Miguel's courage during dangerous reconnaissance missions, his sense of humor that kept morale high during difficult times, and his dedication to protecting his fellow soldiers. Sarah listened with tears in her eyes as Captain Morrison painted a picture of her brother's service that was far more detailed than anything the family had been told. Miguel had rarely talked about his deployment when he came home on leave, preferring to focus on family and normal life rather than the dangers he faced overseas. "Miguel talked about his family all the time," Captain Morrison continued. "He was so proud of his little sister who wanted to be a mechanic. He said you were going to join the military and work on helicopters. He used to joke that maybe someday you'd be taking care of his aircraft." Sarah's hand went to the patch again, this time not to hide it, but to touch it gently. "He gave me this patch before his last deployment," she said. "He told me to keep it safe and remember that he was fighting for something important. He said if anything happened to him, I should find a way to honor the unit and the men he served with." Captain Morrison's expression grew somber. He knew what had happened on Miguel's last deployment because he had been there. It was a mission that haunted him, one that had gone wrong in ways that no one could have anticipated. Miguel had been killed along with 3 other soldiers when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device during a routine patrol. "Sarah," Captain Morrison said carefully, "I need to tell you about your brother's last mission. I was there when it happened." The next hour was one of the most difficult conversations either of them had ever experienced. Captain Morrison told Sarah the complete story of her brother's final mission, details that had never been shared with the family for security reasons. He described how Miguel had volunteered for the dangerous patrol, how he had saved 2 other soldiers' lives before the explosion that killed him, and how his actions had prevented an even greater tragedy. Sarah learned that her brother had died a hero. Not just in the general sense that all fallen soldiers are heroes, but in the specific sense that his actions in those final moments had saved lives. Captain Morrison told her about the letter of commendation that Miguel had earned posthumously, recognition that had been delayed due to the classified nature of the mission. Through her tears, Sarah told Captain Morrison about the impact of Miguel's death on their family. Their parents had struggled with the loss, and Sarah had channeled her grief into determination to serve her country as her brother had. She explained how wearing his patch had become her way of carrying his memory with her and honoring his sacrifice. "I joined the military because of Miguel," Sarah said. "I wanted to do my part, to serve the people who were still fighting over there. When I became an aviation mechanic, I felt like I was helping to keep pilots and crews safe, the way I wished someone could have kept Miguel safe." Captain Morrison was deeply moved by Sarah's dedication and the personal motivation behind her exceptional work. Her attention to detail and commitment to excellence weren't just professional pride. They were her way of honoring her brother's memory and protecting the lives of the people who depended on her work. As their conversation continued, Captain Morrison realized that Sarah's presence in his unit wasn't just a coincidence. Her brother's patch, her dedication to her work, and her personal mission to honor fallen soldiers by protecting the living created a connection that transcended their normal military relationship. "Sarah," Captain Morrison said, "I want you to know that Miguel would be incredibly proud of you. The work you do, the dedication you show, the way you honor his memory, it's exactly what he would have wanted. You're not just maintaining aircraft, you're protecting the lives of soldiers who are still fighting." The revelation changed everything between them. Their professional relationship evolved into something deeper, built on shared memories of Miguel and a mutual understanding of sacrifice and service. Captain Morrison began to see Sarah not just as a skilled mechanic, but as the sister of a soldier he had respected and cared about. Sarah, for her part, found comfort in talking with someone who had known Miguel as a soldier rather than just as a brother. Captain Morrison's stories filled in gaps in her understanding of her brother's service and helped her feel more connected to the military community that Miguel had been part of. Word of their connection spread slowly through the unit, not as gossip, but as a story that reinforced the bonds between military personnel and families. Other soldiers who had served with Miguel came forward to share their own memories, creating a support network that Sarah had never expected to find. The maintenance hangar where they worked became a place of deeper meaning for both of them. Every time Sarah worked on Captain Morrison's aircraft, she was reminded of her brother's service and sacrifice. Every time Captain Morrison flew that aircraft, he carried with him the memory of a fallen soldier and the knowledge that his helicopter was maintained by that soldier's sister. Their story became an inspiration to others in the unit. Sarah's dedication took on new meaning when people understood the personal motivation behind it. Captain Morrison's respect for his maintenance crew deepened as he realized that many of them had their own connections to military service and sacrifice. The coincidence of their meeting seemed too perfect to be random chance. Two people connected by tragedy and loss had found each other in a way that allowed healing and understanding to begin. Sarah's decision to wear her brother's patch, hidden but always present, had created a moment of recognition that changed both of their lives. As weeks passed after their emotional conversation, Sarah and Captain Morrison developed a working relationship that went beyond the normal pilot-mechanic dynamic. They talked about Miguel regularly, sharing memories and stories that kept his spirit alive in their daily work. Sarah felt that she was finally able to honor her brother's memory in the way he would have wanted. Captain Morrison found that his conversations with Sarah helped him process his own feelings about the soldiers he had lost over the years. Her perspective as a family member helped him understand the broader impact of military service and sacrifice. He began to see his own role as a pilot not just as completing missions, but as honoring the memory of fallen comrades. The transformation in their relationship was noticed by others in the unit, but not in a negative way. Their shared connection created an atmosphere of respect and dedication that influenced everyone around them. Other soldiers began to share their own stories of loss and motivation, creating a stronger sense of community within the unit. Sarah's work performance, which had already been exceptional, somehow became even better. Every inspection she performed, every repair she completed, every system she tested, was done with the knowledge that her brother's memory was watching over her work. She felt Miguel's presence in everything she did, encouraging her to maintain the highest possible standards. Captain Morrison's flying was also affected by their connection. Knowing that his aircraft was maintained by Miguel's sister gave him additional confidence in his equipment. He flew with the knowledge that every system had been checked by someone who understood the personal cost of mechanical failure. The patch that had started it all remained Sarah's most treasured possession. She continued to wear it under her uniform, but now it carried additional meaning. It wasn't just a memorial to her fallen brother, it was a bridge between past and present, connecting her to Captain Morrison and to the broader military community that had embraced her as family. Months passed after Captain Morrison and Sarah discovered their connection through Miguel's patch. Their relationship had evolved into something special, built on mutual respect, shared memories, and a deep understanding of military service and sacrifice. The entire unit had been touched by their story, creating an atmosphere of dedication and family that enhanced everyone's performance. Sarah continued to excel in her role as an aviation mechanic, but now her work carried additional purpose. Every day she arrived at the hangar, she felt Miguel's presence encouraging her to maintain the highest standards. Her reputation for excellence spread beyond their unit, and she began receiving recognition from higher-ranking officers who noticed her exceptional attention to detail. Captain Morrison had also grown from their connection. His conversations with Sarah about Miguel had helped him process years of accumulated grief from losing soldiers under his command. He found that talking about these experiences with someone who understood loss from a family perspective was healing in ways he hadn't expected. Their professional partnership had become a model for others in the unit. Pilots began developing closer relationships with their maintenance crews, understanding that these weren't just technical workers but dedicated professionals whose family connections to military service ran deep. The culture of the entire unit shifted toward greater mutual respect and appreciation. One morning in late spring, Captain Morrison arrived at the hangar earlier than usual to find Sarah already deep in her pre-flight inspection routine. She was working on a different Apache helicopter, one that belonged to another pilot who was deploying to Afghanistan within the week. Sarah had volunteered to perform extra maintenance checks on aircraft heading to combat zones, wanting to ensure that every system was perfect before the helicopters left for dangerous missions. "You're here early again," Captain Morrison observed, approaching Sarah as she worked on the helicopter's targeting system. "That's Lieutenant Wilson's bird, isn't it?" Sarah looked up from her work and smiled. "Yes, sir. He's deploying next week, and I wanted to make sure everything is absolutely perfect. I know how important it is for pilots to have complete confidence in their equipment when they're in hostile territory." Captain Morrison nodded appreciatively. He understood the extra care Sarah put into maintenance for deploying aircraft. Her personal connection to combat operations through Miguel's service made her especially conscious of the life-and-death importance of proper maintenance. She never wanted another family to receive the news that hers had received about Miguel. "Lieutenant Wilson is lucky to have you working on his aircraft," Captain Morrison said. "I've heard good things about your work from pilots throughout the squadron. Word is getting around that aircraft maintained by Sergeant Martinez are the most reliable in the fleet." Sarah blushed slightly at the praise, but continued her methodical inspection. I just do my job, sir. Miguel always said that in the military everyone depends on everyone else. I want to make sure I never let anyone down. As Sarah worked, Captain Morrison noticed that she was wearing a different patch under her uniform today. Instead of Miguel's 217 Cav patch, he could see the edge of what appeared to be a newer unit patch. Curious but not wanting to pry, he decided to ask about it. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I noticed you're wearing a different patch today. Is everything okay with Miguel's patch?" Sarah paused in her work and turned to face him. Her expression was serious but not sad. "Miguel's patch is safe, sir. I keep it at home now in a special place, but I've been thinking a lot about what Miguel would want me to do, and I decided it was time for something new." She reached under her t-shirt and pulled out a chain that held Miguel's original patch, now encased in a protective clear cover. "I wear this close to my heart every day," she explained, "but I also decided to start wearing the patch of the unit I'm serving with now. Miguel served his unit with pride, and I think he would want me to do the same." The patch she was wearing under her uniform was from their current squadron, the same unit that Captain Morrison flew with. It represented her acceptance of her place in the military community and her commitment to the soldiers she served alongside every day. Captain Morrison was moved by the symbolism of Sarah's decision. She wasn't abandoning Miguel's memory, she was building upon it by fully embracing her current service. It showed a maturity and understanding of military tradition that impressed him deeply. "That's exactly what Miguel would have wanted," Captain Morrison said. "He was proud to serve his unit, and he would be proud to see you serving yours with the same dedication." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Wilson, the pilot whose aircraft Sarah was preparing for deployment. He was a young officer on his first combat deployment, and his nervousness was evident in his demeanor. He had requested extra time to review his aircraft before leaving for Afghanistan, wanting to familiarize himself with every system and component. "Good morning, Sergeant Martinez, Captain Morrison," Lieutenant Wilson said, approaching them with his flight gear. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," Captain Morrison replied. "Sergeant Martinez was just finishing her inspection of your aircraft. You couldn't be in better hands." Sarah turned to Lieutenant Wilson with a reassuring smile. "Your Apache is in excellent condition, sir. I've completed a full inspection of all systems and everything is functioning perfectly. Would you like me to walk you through what I've checked?" For the next hour, Sarah conducted the most thorough aircraft briefing that Lieutenant Wilson had ever received. She explained every system, demonstrated the operation of various components, and answered his numerous questions with patience and expertise. Her knowledge of the aircraft was encyclopedic, and her explanations were clear and easy to understand. Captain Morrison watched the interaction with growing pride in Sarah's development as a military professional. She had grown from a skilled mechanic into a mentor and teacher, sharing her expertise with nervous young pilots who needed confidence in their equipment. Her gentle manner and obvious competence had a calming effect on Lieutenant Wilson's pre-deployment anxiety. As Sarah concluded her briefing, Lieutenant Wilson's confidence in his aircraft was visibly restored. "Thank you, Sergeant Martinez," he said. "I feel much better knowing that you've personally inspected every system. I've heard about your reputation for excellence, and now I understand why pilots specifically request aircraft that you've maintained." After Lieutenant Wilson left to complete other pre-deployment preparations, Captain Morrison and Sarah continued their conversation about Miguel and military service. Their discussions had become a regular part of their working relationship, providing both of them with emotional support and perspective. "Sarah," Captain Morrison said, "I've been thinking about something and I wanted to discuss it with you. There's a ceremony coming up next month to honor fallen soldiers from various units, including the 217 Cav. I think Miguel will be recognized, and I thought you might want to attend." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "I would be honored to attend, sir. Miguel never received a proper ceremony because of the classified nature of his mission." It would mean everything to my family to see him honored publicly. The ceremony Captain Morrison mentioned was an annual event that recognized soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country. It brought together families, fellow soldiers, and military leadership to honor the fallen and support those they left behind. For Sarah, it would be an opportunity to see Miguel recognized in the way he deserved. "I'll make sure you have all the details," Captain Morrison promised. "And Sarah, I'd like to speak at the ceremony about Miguel. I think people should hear about the kind of soldier he was and the sacrifice he made." The prospect of Captain Morrison speaking about Miguel at the ceremony deeply moved Sarah. She knew that having someone who had served with Miguel tell his story would mean more to her family than any official military recognition. It would help them understand the impact Miguel had made on the people he served with. As the weeks passed, leading up to the ceremony, Sarah threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She continued to maintain aircraft to the highest standards, but now she was also helping to prepare for the memorial service. She worked with Captain Morrison to gather stories and memories about Miguel that could be shared with other families who had lost soldiers. The ceremony preparation brought Sarah into contact with other military families who had experienced similar losses. She discovered a community of people who understood her grief and her determination to honor her brother's memory through service. These connections helped her realize that she wasn't alone in her experience and that her way of coping with loss was shared by many others. On the day of the ceremony, Sarah's parents traveled from Texas to attend. It was their first visit to see Sarah since she had completed her training, and they were amazed by the respect and admiration she had earned from her fellow soldiers. Meeting Captain Morrison and hearing his stories about Miguel provided them with closure they hadn't realized they needed. Captain Morrison's speech about Miguel was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. He spoke eloquently about Miguel's courage, his dedication to his fellow soldiers, and his sacrifice in the line of duty. He described the missions they had flown together and the trust that existed between pilot and ground forces. Most importantly, he talked about Miguel as a person, not just as a soldier. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez was more than just a brave soldier, Captain Morrison said during his speech. He was a brother, a son, and a friend who believed deeply in the mission we were fighting for. His sacrifice wasn't just about duty, it was about love for his country, his fellow soldiers, and the family he left behind. Today, we see that legacy continued in his sister Sarah, who serves with the same dedication and honor that Miguel showed every day. When Captain Morrison mentioned Sarah in his speech, the entire audience turned to look at her. She stood proudly in her dress uniform, Miguel's patch visible on her shoulder, and her current unit patch displayed with equal prominence. The applause that followed was not just for Miguel's memory, but for Sarah's ongoing service and dedication. After the ceremony, many people approached Sarah to thank her for her brother's service and to express admiration for her own dedication to the military. Fellow soldiers, officers, and families of other fallen soldiers all wanted to share their respect and support. Sarah realized that she had become part of something larger than herself, a community bound together by service and sacrifice. The most meaningful moment came when an elderly veteran approached her after the ceremony. He had served in Vietnam and had lost friends in that conflict. "Young lady," he said, "I want you to know that what you're doing matters. Keeping these aircraft safe, honoring your brother's memory, helping young pilots feel confident in their equipment, it all matters. Your brother would be proud, and so are we." As Sarah returned to her duties after the ceremony, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose. The recognition Miguel had received and the connections she had made with other military families strengthened her resolve to continue serving with excellence. She understood now that her work wasn't just about maintaining helicopters, It was about honoring the memory of all fallen soldiers and protecting the lives of those who continued to serve. Captain Morrison continued to fly missions with complete confidence in his aircraft, knowing that it was maintained by someone who understood the true meaning of military service. Their partnership had become a symbol within their unit of the bonds that connect military personnel across ranks and specialties. Sarah's story spread throughout the military aviation community, inspiring other mechanics to see their work as more than just a technical job. Her dedication to excellence, motivated by her brother's memory and supported by her relationship with Captain Morrison, became a model for how personal loss can be transformed into professional excellence and meaningful service. The patch that had started their connection remained a symbol of the bonds that link past and present, fallen soldiers and those who continue their mission. Sarah wore it with pride, knowing that she was carrying forward not just Miguel's memory, but the legacy of all soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country.